few weeks back, Vijay and I were deliberating. Now, we are often involved in digital transformation initiatives. We talk about the topic a lot as practitioners, and we are also consulted by clients from time to time. And we were sort of talking about how a lot of emphasis is given on the strategic and technical aspects of digital transformation, right? A lot of literature exists, people come out there, make big talks, but very little is said about what it means and what happens when a digital transformation initiative is undertaken, and most importantly, its impact on the people who are downstream. Right? We felt we had something to share, and we thought, okay, next talk we are going there and we're going to talk something about it. Which brings us here, and obviously most of you might be wondering, why here, right? Isn't XConf the place where talks about engineering effectiveness happen, where cool tech stuff happens, and here you are trying to talk management science? Are we really the right audience? We had that question to ourselves, and we said, you know what? There's going to be only two kinds of people in the audience, right? A few of them are going to be people who are leading these transformations, basically dictating what needs to change. And the vast majority are going to be people who are going to be impacted by it, which means they need to know how to behave and how some of these changes, when put through in their organizations, how can they be better prepared for it, right? So we said, yeah, it's the right forum. And the second question is, why now? Shay?
Yeah. So, basically, can you flip to the next slide? Yeah. So, take a look at all those numbers. There'll be a quiz in the end asking you all those numbers. So, sorry about all the boring numbers and stats here, but just wanted to bring the point home about why now, right? So, not too long ago, digital transformation was more like, the flavor of the season, nice thing to have. And many of the incumbent organizations used to be like, we pride ourselves in our manual-heavy, high-touch processes which require all these people and all of these processes. But over the last decade or so, things have changed quite radically because we have moved on to a place where smartphones, smart devices have changed the way people interact with organizations, and the younger generations actually prefer to do everything by themselves unless it's very complex. They prefer not to have contact. And the other side is the costs of this high-touch, manual-intensive process has also gone up because labor costs have gone up worldwide and populations are aging, so finding the right people to do this also is getting harder. So now, more and more of the same leaders are going for a digital-first strategy on how they run their business. So I think the thing to note here is that the urgency has increased so much, and it has multiplied all the more with the pandemic because many of the things we thought we could slowly get there were just thrown at us as in not having an option. So with these stats, we're just trying to show the magnitude of funding that is going into the digital transformation efforts and also how important it is for the leaders for these to be successful. Now, that was a great picture, but do all these initiatives actually be able to meet their objectives? And the figure is actually quite dismal. A whopping 70% of them end up failing. And so the thing is that it's not an option anymore, but the fact is, beyond a pilot, which might be successful and which might get us a press release, there's not a lot of success that's actually enduring in organizations. So today we wanted to look at some of our experience and talk about what can we do to make these an ongoing success.
Now, when you speak about success, right, it's important to start where the failure points are, right? So we want to talk about three things today to you all. First is, why do they fail, right? Let's dive a little bit deeper into understanding the core reasons. And more specifically, get down to the aspects that we originally introduced, which is around people, and more specifically on teams, right? We've been having, teamwork is not new to us, right? As hunter-gatherers, we've been, working as teams, operating as teams to get to the outcomes that we want. But what does it mean in the context of digital transformations? How should teams be set up? How should they behave, right? There is a certain nuance to it, and we want to double down on that. And third most important thing is, once we know how a good team looks like from a digital transformation perspective, how do we set them up for success, right? Because they can't operate in a silo in today's complex environment. So these are the three areas that we'll be touching upon. So let's double click on why they fail. if you look at the research, and this is broadly published by a whole bunch of rating agencies, analysts, and overwhelmingly they all agree on one thing, right? That is, during the phases of transformation, there's usually a pilot where an organization comes out with a bang and says, we are going to transform, introduces a change champion, a digital transformation leader or an expert in the organization who says, we are going to do the big, flashy, bold things. It starts off big, and suddenly it starts to disappear. Half a year later or a few quarters later, you'll start to see this executive taking a back seat, right? From the most visible person, friend of the CEO, to becoming an invisible person in the organization. It doesn't happen by fluke. It simply happens because when organizations try to scale their transformation efforts, it's increasingly complex. And that's primarily because, if you see the whys on the right, the most common reasons for failure are always people and culture related. This is usually unprepared for at the beginning of the transformation. Because when leaders get together to fund their initiatives, think about transformation, they look at customers, they look at the strategy, they look at the technology. They don't look at what am I going to do with the people in my organization who I expect to change, who I expect to behave very differently. That's seldom thought through upfront and often reacted upon much later when change is not very effective. And that's why you see that most prominent executive taking a backseat and becoming invisible, right? Now, how can teams help here? Shay?
Yeah, so we have the same people that we have all along in our organization, but the secret sauce is when we put them together into teams, we can see the transformation actually scaling and being successful. So to the barriers that Shyam talked about, what are the key things that need to change in a digital-first organization? So the first thing is about the mindset. So the overarching mindset of an organization really drives the culture and the reputation of the company. So, for example, if you have a mindset that's very risk-averse in an organization, you'll see that they are never the thought leader in doing something new in terms of changing the business processes. They typically wait for the competitors to do stuff, for things to be proven out before they also embark on it. So they tend to be the follower. So with the mindset, it's a very, very important thing that the organization can actually be ready for the flux and uncertainty that digital transformation brings. So which are the key characteristics of the new mindset? The first thing has to be the customer value focus. So we very often focus, we'll get to it in a little bit in more detail, we focus on the outputs, even as leaders in an organization, and we need to start looking at what's the value that we are bringing to the customer, and there may be many different ways to achieve that value. The second thing is around the culture of experimentation. In most organizations, even today, it's we say we want to make this change. We think about how exactly this change has to happen. We fund it, and then you can never go wrong. And even if what you built ended up being a disaster, it's always like trying to salvage, we did the right thing. So what we're saying is that we really need to change that to say that, you know what, it's okay to go wrong. What we have to do is come up with a smart hypothesis on how we can solve a particular problem, experiment on it really quickly, and see how that works. So rather than spending years to come up with something which we think is the right solution, we spend a shorter amount of time trying something out, and if we even make a mistake, it's okay, we pivot from it and do something better. And the last thing is around being responsive to the market shift. So the first two aspects will prepare you for being more responsive to the market because customer needs are changing much more rapidly than they ever did before. There's competitive interests which come in that you have to react to, and of course things like COVID that we never anticipated, which changed things so much. So that's the mindset aspect of it. The second aspect is around the ownership and empowerment.
Now, I'll probably add a bit on mindset, right? There was once a very senior executive who came and said, Shyam, this is a great thing that you're talking about mindset, but we want the downstream employees to bring it bottom up, right? We are a very bottom-up culture. And I told him, it sounds very romantic. It works great on paper, but in reality, it doesn't work, right? People are going to look up to their bosses, no matter how flat an organization you are. So unless your leaders embody this mindset, it's not going to go all the way down, right? First things first, you change, and then expect your people to change, right?
Yeah, the second aspect is around exactly that you change your mindset where you feel that people are capable of owning the problem that you're given to them. Rather than telling them, this is what you need to do, give them the empowerment that they can think through what's the right solution for the problem. So just wanted to talk about why we need the teams and why we need the empowerment. So the magnitude and speed of change in any transformation is really, really large. Now, even if you're thinking about there's this organization that wanted to introduce the online payment capability for their customers, even with that, it's not just a bunch of code changes that need to happen. There's the whole retraining of the staff who deal with that particular business area that needs to happen. There's a culture shift in the customers. There's the user experience that we have to think through. So there's a lot of moving parts that need to work together for this to be successful. And there's back-end developers, front-end developers, marketing folk, there's the customer service teams, and they don't really work together. The pieces are just shifted from one group to the other, and that doesn't really work in a transformation because you don't know why you're doing something because you're not really connected with the other group. So the orchestration can only happen really well and in a great connection if we have outcome-driven cross-functional teams.
When we say teams, right, we are referring to teams being or becoming the most fundamental unit of measurement in an organization. This is a radical shift from how most of us in our organizations are typically measured, evaluated, because we are still seen as individual. Vijay is seen as Vijay, Shyam is seen as Shyam, right? But in the context of a digital transformation, that level of granularity doesn't work. We have to go one level higher and see what are the teams that we are both part of, what are the roles that we are contributing to, and how are we measuring up to the outcome. So the fundamental unit there becomes a team, and that's a radical shift for most people to fathom, right?
Okay, so this is how outcome-driven teams need to change in the way of working of organizations. So typically today, most organizations, it's a task-based execution. You have a bunch of resources who are specialists in their areas, like I mentioned, front-end devs, back-end devs, BAs, testers. So they are essentially a pool, and then we make them do a bunch of activities to generate an output. So for example, going back to our payment example, typically by the time the work comes to these individuals, it's like we have decided that we want to have online payment capability, and it's these 4 payment types, and it has to be released by the end of the year, right? And the team is just building through it. So there is never an effort to actually, unless people try really hard, to understand or to make people comprehend why are we doing this. So we take payments even today, but why are we suddenly moving to online payments? So the outcome, which is what we are trying to deliver some value to the customer by doing these online payments, that is completely lost to most of the teams. They're like, my boss told me, this is the deadline, we have to do this, right? So there's a very tenuous relationship between the outputs that I'm building today and the outcome that I'm trying to get to through these outputs. So what we are saying, the only way that a digital transformation can scale is that we flip it to having teams committed to achieving outcomes instead. So in our example, all we need to tell the teams is, let's figure out how can I, so for example, if the overall strategic objective in an organization is that I want to be able to reduce the collection costs, right? So online payments is a way of doing that. So if I tell the teams that I want to reduce my costs by this percentage, so can you help me with it? The teams which are closest to the customers are very well placed to say, okay, how can we solve for this? So then the outputs are actually very well linked to the outcomes, and the teams are actually committed to those outputs because they create them. And you might actually get a very good solution instead of telling the team what to do. So for example, the team, when told that we have to provide an online payment mechanism, would say that, you know what, 80% of our payments happen to come through bank transfer. So let's release that first, rather than these 4 payment types you need on day one. So that actually helps you, again, going back to the culture of experimentation. You push something out much quicker, and you have an impact and maybe you have to introduce another payment type, but you're not wasting a year before you find that out. So it's the outcomes are helping you to get to market faster, to build something that is going to be more relevant to the customer, and also your teams feel they belong a lot more in what's going out.
And it also helps you to sort of identify what kind of teams you actually need, right? As opposed to thinking from, I have this bunch of people and I need them to get to this, you start to think, I need to get here, and what kind of people do I need to actually make that happen, right? So you're going to flip the thinking, you're going to assemble the leanest possible team to get to the outcome, right? And this is outcome first thinking, as opposed to looking at what you have and figuring out what you can do with it.
Okay, moving on to the cascading of ownership. So doing online payment is not the overall objective of an organization, right? So every organization, and especially the publicly listed organizations, have to talk about where they're going as a business. So what they have to keep coming out with is their vision and the strategic objectives. So the strategic objectives could be something like, I want to grow my revenue by introducing this product line, or it may be something like I just talked about the payment example. I want to bring down operation costs for servicing of our loans. So those objectives are defined by the organization leadership, and what we're trying to say is that the outcome that every single team is working on should have a connect back to that strategic objective. Now again, going back to our payment example, why is the team doing online payments? Because the goal owners who are owning that particular journey say that, okay, we need to do something to help with some objective of the organization. What's the objective of the organization? That we want to reduce operation costs. So that percolates down to the goal owners, who then look at, okay, what are the different ideas or bets that we could have which will help us to get to that goal? And then the product teams actually work through implementing those goals. So there is a very clear connect between where the organization wants to go and what I'm doing day to day.
This is evident if you go to the team, which is actually structured this way, and ask that to the development team, why do you think what you do actually makes a difference to the organization? If they're able to articulate this very clearly, it means that they have a clear line of sight as to how their small piece of action is going to contribute to the overall benefit, right? When that cascading linearity exists, you can sort of see if there is a missing linkage. If the outcomes that you are hoping to achieve do not correspond with the outputs, you're going to see a break in linkage, and your downstream teams are themselves going to come and say, hey, you know what, this is not going to make sense. It's not going to add up to that.
So yeah, and again, just wanted to call out that all the outcomes need to be SMART. I guess you all know the acronym, but they have to be very specific, they have to be measurable. And the thing is, we can say something vague like, I want to build a super app. But then what do your teams down on the ground do? They're just like, okay, what purpose are you building this super app for? What's the first thing you want to get out of it? We need to be very, very clear. And by when do you need it, so that teams can actually do stuff that is meaningful and impactful. So yeah, just one more thing in terms of the cascading of ownership. We want to, as human beings, we don't work very well with context switching and multitasking. In the previous panel, they were talking about the cognitive load, right? So for the outcomes from the teams to be really meaningful, what we have to do is avoid the multiple ownership. So what we're saying here is that you want to try and limit the outcome that a team is responsible to at a time to just one. Because if you hold them responsible for two outcomes, they are probably dividing up their time to work on both of these, and both don't get done very well. Similarly, if you divide up one outcome across multiple teams, there's always that lack of ownership, saying, I did my job, they didn't do their job, so this is not done, right? So what we want to try and do is, at a time, have a clear sense of linear ownership, so that the outcomes that we break down in the journey are assigned to one team at a time in terms of their outcomes.
Now, one thing to call out for, because every time we show this, there's always someone who's very enthusiastic who says, hey, you know what? We don't have exclusive teams. We operate where I need to look at 4 or 5 projects. I need to be involved in multiple initiatives. That's cool, right? What we are trying to say is, when you look at the fundamental unit as a team, you're not looking at an individual. A team has a very specific outcome-oriented nature, and individuals in that could actually come and go, right? You might not need a specific individual for a different, the continuity of the entire team's lineage. So those things are possible, but just that the team has a very clear outcome-oriented, linearity. Now, having said all of this, right, that's the what, and often this is usually the question that we get asked as practitioners, because digital transformation also involves HR folks on the front line, right? The head of HR or the person involved in, the people wellness come and say, you want our people to change their behavior. We don't want attrition. We want people to be happy. And how do we set these teams up for success? That's a common question that comes to us. This is the first statement and probably the most important statement that we end up flashing to them, though not necessarily like this, but we convey the intent. I'll give you all a moment to grasp the intensity of the statement because it is saying the facts, right? We cannot motivate people to be teamwork specialists if you're going to individually reward them and sort of promote them. I'll illustrate this with an example. A few years back, I was fortunate and misfortunate to be involved in one of the local banks where I reported to a director. We were working on one of the very visible, very, let's say, prominent initiative where there were 3 directors in the bank, 3 different departments coming together to make it happen. Now, it was very clear. Anyone who is running this project, seeing it end to end and sort of seeing it through would get promoted, which means one of the 3 directors is going to go up on top. And if the director goes up on top, pretty much the team also gets a boot up, right? It's evident in banks. And we said, okay, we have to get to the outcome. Here are 3 teams, 3 directors, now go. Now, this particular organization had a habit of rewarding alpha behavior, right? The alphas get the promotion, right? Now, I leave you all to imagine how we would have behaved, how great the teamwork and collaboration would have been. But that is a classic case example of having individual performance measures alone and asking people to be working in a team, getting to an outcome, classic case for failure, right? If you ever come and catch us up offline, I'll tell you what happened to the rest of the story. But when the HR folks coming back to the HR people who come and ask us how to set up teams, we recommend a 4-pronged approach. We recommend 4 attributes that are most common to pretty much all of us here. We've not come across, personally, Vijay and I have not come across any instance where we've needed to drop one of these attributes, which are essential for measuring outcome-driven teams. Let's go one by one. First and foremost is the business value that it brings, which is the cascading linearity that Vijay talked about. So whatever outcome that this team is setting out to do should obviously have a benefit to the organization. That needs to be measured. And while doing so, it should not forget the customer involved. So the customer satisfaction is also an important measure. Often when we change the way we deliver value to customers, there is a behavioral shift in the customers too, right? And when there is a behavioral shift, customers are either going to like it or dislike it, and measuring that is going to be super crucial. So that goes in as an important measure. And third is the role skill. So obviously the individual's contribution as part of the team, the role that they play, right? It's not the capability here, it's the role that they play in the team. That needs to be looked at. And when you look at all these 3 collectively, we're going to look at, hey, how is this individual and how is their role adding up to the team and how is this team linking up to the outcome? Now, the 4th important attribute, often this goes missing, quite a few literature also misses this, which is surprising for us, is if you talk about digital transformation, we are talking about a change. And change not only involves learning, it also involves unlearning. It involves behaving slightly differently. And there should be an attribute or a component which sort of recognizes that. Because if you expect me to behave differently, I need to be sort of evaluated. I need to be recognized for the extra efforts that I'm putting in because now I'm not optimized, right? And that is a learning and development aspect of it. So if you look at all these 4 attributes and sort of measure the teams and the roles within the team appropriately, looking at all these 4 attributes holistically, that's a better way to set the teams up for success. Later in the slides, we'll show an example of how we actually did it. But make no mistake, all 4 are important from a digital transformation perspective, and all 4 need to be looked at from a team construct.
So just wanted to talk about the first 2, the business value and the customer satisfaction. I think there's a very, there can be a lot of contention between the 2 if, the leadership doesn't appreciate the customer satisfaction as much as the business value, because leaders are often incentivized that your bonus is going to be based on our revenue growing so much. So they don't really care what the customer experience is like. They just want things to go out so that they can meet that target. So the customer satisfaction aspect ensures that customers actually like this. It's valuable how they feel to interact with whatever you're giving them, right? So it's very important, that's why, to have both of these aspects. There may be things that you do which don't really, there may be an implied business value at the end in terms of your reputation, but it may be just purely to make the customers more satisfied with who you are as an organization.
Cool. Now, we know the attributes. Now, how do you get a buy-in, right? That's the second biggest challenge. If, imagine, tomorrow your boss comes up and says, we're going to change the way in which you're going to be measured. I'm going to change your evaluation criteria. Our first obvious response to that is, why? What's wrong with how you're measuring me today, right? And we would want to understand the rationale for it. So when you go through this, pretty much this cascading linearity of outcomes, and if you introduce these changes, it's important to communicate, emphasize, and get the buy-in and participation from the folks. There is bound to be resistance. So we're not mincing words. The reality is that people are going to resist. There are quite a lot of, as humans, we don't like change very much. Though we can change, we don't like it very much. And most individuals who have hyper-optimized their existence in an organization to doing what they know best, and you can actually see them operating in a bubble, if you introduce change to them, they're going to resist. And getting them through, sort of motivating them, and motivation when I use broadly, right? It could be incentivizing, it could be threatening, you can choose the approach. There's a whole bunch of motivation criteria. But communicating it and motivating people appropriately requires a buy-in and participation. And often at a team level, when you say, I'm not just looking at you as an individual, I'm looking at a team, this sort of becomes a lot more easier to handle. And this is usually coupled with an effective change management. And one fundamental difference from a traditional change management that I'm emphasizing here is that it needs to have a feedback mechanism. So if you introduce digital transformation in your organization, tell people to behave differently, they are going to resist. Don't be dogmatic about pushing it, right? This is the classic mistake that we see in many organizations where it goes through a stage where it's irrecoverable. Half the people are operating in a new way of working. Other half are working in the old way of working. They have no point to converge. They don't know how to converge. They come and say, hey, can you come and fix this for us as consultants, right? Sorry, we can't, right? We'll try, but we really can't, because you've gone to a point of completely flipping one half and ensuring that the other half is nowhere close to making it happen, right? And to make this change, you have to have a feedback mechanism. So when there is resistance, understand the resistance and have an honest conversation amongst yourself. What is it that we are going to change as an organization, and what is it that we are best going to leave untouched? It's not about aiming for perfection. It's about recognizing that these are aspects that cannot be changed. We work with leaders, and there are a few leaders who I really appreciate for their candidness, who at a certain point come to me and say, Shyam, you know what? We know you're harping on this point. I would recommend you to just leave it there. This is best left untouched. And when they say that, I sort of get the statement as a consultant. I know, okay, I won't push any further. Your job is in line, and so is mine. So we'll leave it there, right? And that's an important aspect of it, right? Make no mistake.
So just to add to that, it's also important there where we called out jointly figure out, because very often the leadership that's saying this is what we have to do has no clue of every single aspect that's going to be impacted. So by actually doing the change management, the teams can ask the question, have you thought about this? What happens to this other thing? And it's like, oh, I never realized that, right? Yeah. So that's a very important part. The more you be transparent with the changes coming down the pipe, the more people will tell you these things may break. This thing has not been thought about. That you can also help yourself before it becomes a really bad situation that you can't salvage.
A wise executive once told me that when change management on all of these higher order conversations happen, there are two temperature zones in an organization. He came from a manufacturing setup, so he was using that parlance. He said, you need to ask yourself, was this decision taken at 24 degrees Celsius or was it taken at 48 degrees Celsius? And I asked him, what is the difference? He said, there are a bunch of folks who sit in nice air-conditioned cabins like this, thinking about what they need to change. And there are the others who operate at 48 degrees Celsius who are impacted by that change, right? When you're talking about jointly figuring out, it's about bringing those 48-degree people in to 24 and sending these 24-degree people out to 48 to see what it means, right? Do both, and then you can actually have the proper feedback mechanism. So when, as developers, as software development people, as project managers, program managers, when change is tasked upon you, please do have an honest conversation about what 48-degree in your field looks like with the 24-degree decision makers in your organization, if you can take away one thing from our discussion today. Now, going back to change, I talked about change management and how it needs to go through. Here's a bunch of sort of important questions or defaults, as we would like to call it. It's in no particular order, but there is a certain grouping to it, right? It starts at the high level about why are we bringing this change in the organization? Importantly, addressing what is in it for me from each individual's point of view, or more specifically from each team's point of view, and talking about the processes that are going to be impacted by it, the new ways of doing things, the customer segments that we are going to touch, the operations impact to it, then getting down to the people and capabilities. What is it that we have? What is it that we lack? How do we sort of bring that change in people's behavior? And finally, talking about the enablers that the organization is going to provide, which is what are the support mechanisms available? We know there is a shortage of capacity. How are we going to bring it either from outside, or how are we going to train it? And most importantly, there's one last hexagon out there, which is how are we going to recognize the early adopters? There are a few individuals who are willing to make the first step towards making that change. Be open enough, if you are a decision maker, to recognize them, to sort of incentivize them and set them as exemplars. They are usually tagged as change champions in the traditional context, but these are people who have bothered to take the first step, and it's important to recognize them and reward them as well. So a lot of theory, a lot of hexagons. I saw a lot of you taking pictures of that, so I guess the slides will be floated as well. So here's where it all comes together, right? None of this would be relevant if we didn't have proof points to show you how it all works together. So Vijay, you want to talk about this?
Sure. So just wanted to give some context of the change that we introduced at this client. So just in terms of background, one of Thailand's largest financial services companies, market leader in their space. They really not digital first for sure. And they didn't have any compelling reason to change, but they recognized the winds of change. So they wanted to enable, transform their people to be ready for the changes that are coming along. And they were also understanding that there's some disruption coming with the newer players. So they just wanted to be ready. So they brought us in and said, like, you tell us what are the things that we need to transform. So going in there, we were like, okay, what are you doing today? So the starting point was, okay, these are our initiatives that we have at play, technical and non-technical. So there was a set of 200 plus initiatives that they had committed to for the year. And there was about 500 which were not even committed in a backlog. So when we looked through these initiatives, we found them to be really piecemeal initiatives, something small like adding a label on the screen, something else around speeding up this this flow, right? So it wasn't anything like concrete, as in what are you doing this for? The other thing that we noticed was that they only actually finished up about 25% of this year on year. And the rest of it was either some of it was discarded or just carried over to the next year. So they essentially it was pretty much BAU and some tiny increments of improvements that was happening.
I see most of you smiling, might be the reality out here too.
Okay. So to try and make sense of this, we said we can't just work through all of this and say what you need to do. So we tried to categorize these into the different parts of their customer journey. So for a financial services institution selling loans, it was all the way from acquisition to collections, and then of course a 360-degree customer view to upsell. So what we did was try and group this into these journeys so that we can see where are the pain points and what are you trying to solve through some of these. And using that, we came up with our first incremental slice to help them drive to an outcome.
And this was a slice that emerged, right? This is a use case that was ripe for digitization in their organization, and that was of top-up loans. The premise was simple. If you are a credit-worthy customer who already had a loan, They'd just look your profile up and then say, oh, here's this person who's paying on time. I'm just going to give them a little bit extra, right? Who doesn't like a little bit of extra loan, right? And they did this by a very complex maze of 7 people running around, 20 days to actually come up with a list of these target eligible customers, and 38 manual steps, right? Go from this system to that system, run from this office to that office, and then curate it and give it to telesales people whose only job was to take a call and give you those, the plus numbers that you get. They usually get that number and say, hey, would you like an additional loan? Sad part, only 25% of the customers in that list could be reached in a month, right? So it was ineffective, long, arduous for the people involved, and clearly a case where we could actually transform with the technology pieces out there. And the prospects list, the Haribol that you see out there, was mainframe linked. So those of you who have been privileged to work with green screens, you know what I'm talking about. And we took this up. We said, okay, here's a great scenario. They assembled a bunch of teams which involved digital, tech, a true cross-functional team. And we started by setting out those 4 attributes that I talked about. And we said, your outcome is to bring in efficiency here. And while doing so, we actually sort of set the measurement criteria very differently. I'm just illustrating 2 roles of the team, the product owner and tech lead, 2 broad categories that might be relevant to the folks here. And if you see, the product owners were incentivized, or they were measured more on business value and the customer satisfaction aspect of it, because they were involved in actually steering the vision of what was being done. And the tech leads, who were responsible for modernizing that big Haribol maze, were also measured against how effectively they did it and how they brought about the changes, the new ways of working, the architectural patterns, and enabled the rest of the teams along with them, right? So they were compensated, or they were sort of measured a little bit more on the other 2 criteria. The rest of the team members were somewhere in between. But the interesting thing is, all 4 criteria applied to every single individual in the team, which means if a product owner was really making a not so ideal decision, the tech lead would go and say, here, you know what, 10% of my evaluation is based on that, and I don't see eye to eye on what you're trying to do here, right? So there's going to be a conversation within the team, and the team is going to keep each other in check to go towards the outcome. So what were the criteria that emerged? You can actually see it out on the slides. So for this particular use case, it was about how many customers are we reaching. So 25% was not so ideal, so we need to get that up. And most importantly, they should also be availing it. So it's not that I reach all 100% of the customers, they should actually be buying the loans, right? If they don't avail it, then the customer satisfaction score dips. And likewise, there were criteria set for each of those dimensions. And when we put them through, we introduced new ways of working. Earlier, Vijay talked about the hypothesis-driven approach. So we got that to this team. The original approach, which was there before this team kickstarted, was to optimize what it took to get that list, and most importantly, give more to the telesales people. So their original idea was to increase the number of telesales people, give them a more effective way to engage with the customers, and make them do more calls. This team, armed with this kind of expectation, they said, we are going to look at it differently. The hypothesis of this team was that if we shifted from a push-based approach to a pull-based approach, that is, if I can tell the customers that you're eligible for a loan and let the customers pick it up themselves, we are going to have a much higher hit rate and a much higher satisfaction. They tested it out in a lightweight fashion with a small bunch of customers, found that it was true, and then they went about changing the whole thing. And when they actually finished this particular thing, what really resulted in was something that was eye-opening for the entire organization. They were able to reach 100% of the customers that they originally intended to. It was very simple. All they had to do was a small notification on the app. But most importantly, with their hypothesis proven, they were able to free up the 60 packs telesales capacity. Now, all these 60 people no longer needed to do the calls. They could engage in much more personalized selling. And the team, the tech leads who were measured on modernizing it, figured out better ways to do it that they could reduce the cycle time it took. So there was a 20% improvement in the cycle time of the overall process. No more manual running around. The entire thing was automated. That particular green screen dependency was completely modernized, right? And the whole workflow was smooth, clean to see. Now, if you actually see, there is a tech modernization, there is a process modernization, there is a customer satisfaction, because no longer are you bombarding them with a push, you are giving the power in the hands of the customer. And the whole team learned that this could be done much faster, much cheaper, with less oversight, right? And did it all work just because of the metrics? Answer is no, but we do believe that those 4 metrics and the way we set up this team and empowered them played a large role in the way they actually went about bringing this change. So, coming to the end of pretty much what we are trying to say, there are 5 things that we covered today. First, your transformation challenges are largely going to be around scaling. Second, when it comes to scaling, people and culture-related challenges are the most important and the most significant ones that you need to pay attention to. Teams are an important construct to sort of overcoming these challenges. And for teams, you need to have leaders with the right mindset who are empowering this team to be a differentiator. You ensure team commitment by making sure that you can recognize not just the individual contribution, but their outcome-linked contribution at an individual level. And make sure that your change management is a lot more holistic and effective with the right kind of feedback and joint participation to make sure this adoption rate is at a success. That's pretty much what we had to share. We have 3 more minutes. We can take questions from the floor.